too late. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Song of Ice and Fire Reread-Along 2023. And we are having our first official live show of A Game of Thrones. And so here I am obviously joined by the other hosts of this read along. And I'm going to go ahead and allow them to introduce themselves before we go right into the book. So starting off here with Scott. Tell us a bit about yourself and your channel.
Yeah, I'm Scott. I'm the Bald Booktuber. I've been on YouTube for about a year. Haven't talked about A Song of Ice and Fire as much as I'd like to, so I'm happy to be part of this. It's been my favorite series for about 20 years, so I've been reading it for a long time, reading and rereading, and it's been several years since the reread, so excited to be part of this.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Alex.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex from Tall Guy Reads. I've been on Party BookTube for about 9 or 10 months at this point. And A Song of Ice and Fire is a series that, like Scott, I haven't talked a lot about on my channel, but I've read multiple times throughout my life. It's probably the first big adult fantasy series I've read outside of like something like Lord of the Rings. And so I've reread book one, especially multiple times, and I've never really talked about it in a group of people outside of like online, like Reddit and stuff. So this will be a lot of fun. I've been really looking forward to this.
Fantastic. We'll go to Joanna next.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Joanna from the channel Joanna Souza, and I'm joined by someone who's named after the Starks. His name's Starkey, so he's here. So to just give you an idea of how much I love this series. So I've been on BookTube. I was on BookTube a very long time ago, and then I came back like roughly 2 years ago or something like that. And then yeah, I have read these books. Like I think A Game of Thrones was my third time reading it, and I don't really talk about it much on my channel, but it is the series that is me. Like I love this series with all my heart, clearly, and I'm very, very, very excited to talk with you guys about this.
Fantastic. And Yolene.
Hi everyone. So I am Yolene. I have a small BookTube channel as well, Yolene Reads, but like everybody else, I haven't really talked about A Song of Ice and Fire too much, just because it's been a long while since I've read it. It was also the very first big fantasy series that I've read almost a decade ago, or a little bit over a decade even. So yes, it was definitely time for a reread.
Yep.
Fantastic. And I feel like a lot of us are in a similar place where we read this series before having a channel, and it meant so much to us. And so it was so special to have this reread experience so we could have a chance to have A Song of Ice and Fire content on our channels. Because as fantasy booktubers, I feel like you should have A Song of Ice and Fire content. Maybe that's too mean, too big of a role to put down. But I just love this series. It means so much to me. It opened up every door of wonder and excitement that I would want in a fantasy series. And I'm very excited. So this is, of course, the first full spoiler discussion. We are going into spoilers for A Game of Thrones in this discussion. At the halfway point in this discussion, or at a certain point, we will move into full series spoilers so we could talk about the foreshadowing as we caught it in book one for the rest of the series. So I will put a banner on the screen when we get there. But for now, we're just going into book one spoilers. And first thing I just want to ask everyone is about the writing style. Now, this is something I felt like I could have addressed and totally forgot to when I did my review of A Game of Thrones earlier this week. So I would love to hear your thoughts on the way that George R.R. Martin writes. So we'll start with Scott, you first.
Yeah, I think probably his prose is maybe his most underrated part of his writing. I think it's very, very good. Robin Hobb will always be the queen for me. I think she has the best prose in the genre, but he's not too far behind. If you just read the prologue and read that first chapter, you can hear a lot of, like, it just flows so nicely. I don't really know how to describe it other than, he's introducing the others, he's introducing a brand new world, and it just flows so wonderfully. And it goes that way through the entire series. I really, really love his writing style. I think it's fantastic.
Fantastic. Alex, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's been a while since I've read these books, so I kind of forgot. Sorry for the dogs if you can hear that, but I kind of forgot like how his prose read, and so after reading a bunch of other fantasy and coming back to this, it was just really nice. And I think one thing I love about his prose is that it's I would say it's very approachable, and I think even for the size of the series and how big these books are, it's very readable, and it kind of is just propulsive, in that you just keep wanting to read more. It's very easy to like crush 200 pages of one of these books pretty quickly if you sat down and read it. And I've always loved that about his writing. You're not really focusing on the writing; it allows you to focus on the story that he's telling, which is always really nice.
Beautifully said.
I agree. I think most of you know I'm not a native speaker of this language. And so it was something that was really scary for me when I first went into them. I was like, they're big, it's fantasy, and this is not my native language. So am I going to understand them? And it was so easy. You just fall into them. It's exactly what you said, Alex. You just focus on the story, the characters, the world, the prophecy, the dreams. And by the time you're done, you're like, wow. And I even thought like, oh, he doesn't really have a writing style, and then this time reading I was like, well, he does, and I just love it so much. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that the comparison with Robin Hobb is really spot on, because she also has a way of writing high quality books, but they are very accessible, and it's almost like the writing style is a means to an end. You have a very big world, it's very complex, but the writing style makes it easy to jump into that world. I usually like a more flowery writing style, but I think that with this book and with this setting and with this series, it wouldn't really fit. So I really enjoyed what George R. R. Martin did here, even though it's the type of prose that doesn't really stick with me. If you ask me, what do you remember most of A Song of Ice and Fire, I would never say his prose, but it's perfect for the series that he has written.
Yeah. Yeah, I was surprised coming back into rereading this book how easy and accessible the prose was, because I think it was pretty accessible the first time I read it, but at the same time, when you're a first-time reader and you haven't watched the show, I think it does help you to have watched the show possibly, but if you haven't watched the show and you're reading it for the first time, you're trying to absorb a lot of things that he's introducing to you, a lot of characters, a lot of settings, but when you're familiar with it, it just flows so well. And I feel like it's very accessible. It reads very fast. And at the same time, it doesn't feel rushed to me. And that's something I also really appreciate, when an author is able to take the time that they need to take. But at the same time, it never felt like a slow burn to me personally. It doesn't feel like a slow burn in the sense of like Robin Hobb's type of slow burn. It still feels like we are interspersing quite a bit of action, quite a bit of exciting moments that are here and there. So I did appreciate that about it, the writing style as well.
I think he probably writes dialogue as well as anybody, and that's how a lot of his exposition is given to us. And that's what I really appreciate, is his dialogue.
Oh, his dialogue is fantastic. I know everybody's been saying that, but it's so true. I mean, nobody writes dialogue quite like Martin does.
Yeah, I agree. And I think something that I'm always amazed by these books, I think anytime there's a multi-POV story, you're getting character development outside of the characters that are the POVs you're reading. And most of it's done through dialogue or interactions with those characters that you're reading about. So like in the Tyrion chapters you're reading, he's developing Tyrion, but he's also developing everyone else around him. And I just think he does that in a way that I feel like I have a very good grasp of the characters around him, even if they've never gotten a POV chapter. And a lot of that's done through dialogue. So even if it's completely wrong, I feel like I definitely have some type of idea of what these characters' motivations are and so on.
I agree with you. I think there's one character in this book, I think Theon, he's so annoying already, and you're like, oh my, you're such an idiot. And like, you never get a POV chapter from him. You just see him through the eyes of other people. And you're like, yep. What an
Why
idiot.
is this guy always laughing or smiling?
I know, right?
Theon.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I haven't listened to the audiobooks of this series. I don't know if I will try doing that later on as I go on in this reread. We'll see. I'd rather just stick to visually reading it, but I can say that like just visually reading it, the voices in my head, I could hear them. I could hear the sounds of their voices so clearly. So I just feel like it's so distinct and so well written in that sense.
I just feel like he's able to make you really feel like you are this character. You know, when you're in the Sansa chapter, you can, you can also get annoyed, but it makes sense. And then you're in that chapter and you're like, it's so different. And it's just so crazy how he's able to do that.
That's so true. I mean, I think, something we talk about a lot in fantasy, I think, is whether an author has a lot of range, whether they're able to write in different styles. I know Sarah from Sarah Reads was talking about this with Tchaikovsky, Adrian Tchaikovsky, and how he can write sci-fi and then turn around and write fantasy and write various settings and time periods and just a range of styles. But I feel like George R. R. Martin has a range when it comes to so many things as well, characters included. I mean, just a range as far as the ages of the characters and the backgrounds of the characters, female characters, male characters, mothers, fathers, leaders, you name it. He could just capture it all.
Yep.
Yeah. And based on that, I also want to add now about the settings. So that was another part, and I think that also speaks to his range. So I would love to hear, what was your favorite setting, and maybe just any general points you want to say about settings. So Scott, we'll start with you.
Yeah, my favorite chapter in the book, I think it's Tyrion 4 or 5, where he's at the Eyrie and we get introduced to the sky cells, which are, as a person who has a lot of trouble with heights, the most terrifying thing ever, with the downward sloped sky cells where you can't fall asleep or you might fall off the ledge. So yeah, that for sure is my favorite. I also really, really love the wall, and anytime we're out north, super at the wall, that is another of my very favorite things in all of fantasy. Those two settings, definitely for me, and Game of Thrones are my favorites.
We share that, but I'll get to my point later. Alex, you.
Yeah, I would agree. At the wall, anything at the wall is probably some of my favorite chapters in this book, especially. I also like King's Landing. I feel like every time when we first get to King's Landing I love that, and I love the how he introduces it to us, and the Stark girls, and I don't know. I just think that setting is great, and I think you see more of it in the next book. But I think in the Game of Thrones, especially, it's just a really well done place, and I love all those chapters. So.
I think the wall in Winterfell is, of course, one of my, like that beginning, when we're in Winterfell and everyone's there. I love it. But of course, me being me, I'm going to say everything in Essos that we have with Dany. I just love it because it's so different. And I don't know, it's just because you have that juxtaposition of Viserys talking about, they stole our homeland. She's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I've never been there. This is and it's just so different, and I love seeing that, how he's so obsessed with something that she's never even seen, and you get to see her in this environment and kind of how it differs from his experiences as well. So I really liked everything in Vesterthrak, and the culture there is very different. So
I was going to say somewhat the same thing, that I really liked Essos just because it's so different. It's completely removed from everything that we see going on in King's Landing and all of the politics, and I really just like Daenerys' character growth in the first book already. So seeing that evolve as well, for me, the setting and the characters, they go hand in hand. So if I like the characters, I will like the setting as well. But because of that, I also really liked King's Landing, because you can see people who are used to King's Landing, they are used to the knife stabbing, and they are used to that environment of not really trusting anybody. And then you have the Starks and the North who's coming there, and you can see that they're just really not up for the task. And I like it. They're not used to that environment. Just drop them there, and you can see that things are going to go down.
Oh, I love everything you just said, because I totally agree. And that's going to lead into one of the next points I'm going to bring up. But first, I'll just say that I don't know, it's hard for me to choose a favorite setting. And as I mentioned in my video, and I have in the background here of this beautiful art piece, but the chapter where Bran is exploring Winterfell, I guess I just,
that's great.
I guess I'm just, somebody, I just want to be a kid exploring a castle at the end of the day. That's what I want to be. And because that chapter, the way he captured that, and it wasn't even the crazy twist that happens at the end, although of course that was mind shattering when Jaime pushes Bran out the window. But leading up to that, I felt like I could relate. I felt like I remember what it was like. In fact, I used to climb trees in my backyard, and I would pretend that the tree was a castle. And I had all these like different parts of the castle, different towers up different limbs, and there would be a throne over here. And so when Bran is exploring Winterfell and running around, I just felt like I just fell in love with that. And actually, my husband is currently reading a Game of Thrones very, very slowly. And he loved the chapter of Arya at King's Landing when she's running around and jumping through that window. And so I feel like he just captures, again, that childhood wonder so beautifully. And then he juxtaposes it with a lot of horrific things. But I especially love it when an author explores heights in fantasy. That's something that I've discovered over the years. Anytime an author explores like huge heights, and I felt that, of course, with Bran's chapter, but I also felt it with the Eyrie. The Eyrie just, it still blows my mind rereading that section. And when he's looking up, like when Tyrion and Catelyn, when they're going up towards the Eyrie, and it's like they look up and they keep looking up and they keep looking up, and there's just tower upon tower, and it just keeps going into the sky. And I feel like I could just so perfectly see that. And there were two scenes in particular, one at the wall, and I think it was when Tyrion was walking on top of the wall to take a piss. I think it was that scene, and possibly the scene at the Eyrie when Catelyn is trying to walk across that catwalk, and it's
Vertigo.
so narrow. Yes, and I hate vertigo, by the way. It's like the one thing I hate more than anything. But I read when I walk on my treadmill. And so I was walking on this conveyor belt. And when I was reading the chapter of walking on the wall, I did have a moment of like, whoa. Like I could just imagine it. And the same thing with the catwalk. I was like, man, I need to be careful about reading the series at certain points. But I absolutely love the way that he brings those settings to life. And also what you all were saying about Daenerys' settings. And I love just how different the culture is there. I think that is a really good segue to talk about morality, because if there's one thing that I feel like this series challenge, I love the fact that this is not only a fun, incredible, well-realized world with incredible character work, but I also love the fact that George R.R. Martin really challenges us with moral questions. I feel like I've never felt so challenged by an author the way that George R.R. Martin challenges me. So I'd like to hear any general thoughts, and you could go ahead and point to specific moments that challenged you. And we'll start with Scott again.
Yeah, I think probably there's more later in the series than we got here, but I usually point to Ned, and how being honorable in this world is not necessarily going to lead to positive results. I tend to be more interested in the morality questions later on when we're talking about Dany and freeing slaves and that kind of stuff that we won't get to in this book, obviously. But yeah, Ned's choices and assuming that everybody has the same code as he does, which is a terrible assumption, and nobody has the same code that he does. So that leads to some very, very bad results. And so when he, gets the queen aside and says, "I know what you've been doing," and the queen says, "Oh, do you?" Like, obviously, she's not going to do anything. She's going to kill him and go on living, So, that kind of stuff, it's very, very clear that Ned's honor does not play well in this world. Versus when we have characters like Littlefinger and Varys and more of the shady underbelly of things, those are really the characters that are going to prosper and benefit, which is really interesting and a good setup for the first book of a series, I think.
Yeah, beautifully said. And we are doing full spoilers for just book one right now. We will go into full spoilers for the whole series in a little while. All right, Alex.
Yeah, I would agree. I think staying with Ned for a second, George likes to challenge your own morality as a reader. So I feel like constantly throughout the book, you are maybe even rooting for things that you criticize another character for doing earlier. So with Ned, you find yourself questioning him being an honorable person, like kind of yelling at him in some instances, which is like, he can become frustrating for that reason, because you know where it's heading. And then
Funny
the other
joke.
time, and then
Sorry.
and another a little later, like you can watch something like Jaime Lannister doing the same thing. And in book 1 specifically, you feel like you shouldn't be rooting for Jaime, and that Tyrion, I think, is really interesting because he kind of bridges multiple sides of the morality coin. He's very aware, and I think awareness is almost more important than anything else in this world. And just being aware of different people and different ambitions, and reading Tyrion's chapters throughout this book, you kind of get a look at multiple different views on morality. So whether he's interacting with Jon Snow or he's interacting with Ned later in the book, I don't know. I think that's why I've always loved Tyrion's chapter so much in A Game of Thrones, because it's just the most well-rounded moral compass type look at all these characters in this book.
Yeah, well said about Tyrion. All right, Shawana?
I think adding to what you're saying, Alex, about Tyrion, when he's with Jon, and Jon is a little bit high and mighty because he's going to the wall and he thinks, oh, I'm so noble for doing this. And then he's like, yeah, these guys are like rapists and whatever. And then he's like, like, clutching his pearls. And Tyrion is like, these are your brothers now, man. Like, you just gotta, deal with this. And then when he's at the wall and he's training and he thinks, yeah, but I'm better than the others because I am better than the others. And then he has to learn that this is not how you're gonna make friends. This is this could get you killed if you behave like this. And then when he starts being nice to the people that he's nice to, and then especially when Sam arrives and they're so nice with him, and I just love that. I felt so bad for Sam. I love him so much. And so that is one thing where you see someone that you thought was a good character, Jon, where you're like, yeah, I'm rooting for Jon, right? And then you see him be so like, but I am so much better than everyone else. You're like, wait a second, So I think that's one. And the other one is the whole scene with Lady and her having to die instead of Nymeria. There, you think that that Robert is not a great king. Robert is just a little bit of like, he's Robert. But then in that scene, you're like, kind of hate you right now, So,
Yeah.
I probably have the very unpopular opinion that I severely dislike Ned and I severely dislike Robert. And I think that with Ned, because I've thought about this for a very long time, I don't understand why everybody loves him and then hates Cersei, and I'm somehow the other way around, at least for the first book. But I think what annoys me is that he has that holier than thou attitude because he puts duty first and he has those rules and he lives by the rules. But somehow that doesn't mean that you're doing something that's morally good or ethically correct. If you look at the actions that he's taking, it's not in line with what he finds important somehow. For example, when he confronts Cersei, if you have like half of a brain cell, you know that that's not going to end well. Like, war is inevitable. Even if Cersei goes like, oops, yeah, you're right, I'm going to take my children and run away, then still war would happen because Tywin Lannister is not going to let that happen. So I don't really understand his actions with his motives. Even if I know his motives, it doesn't really go hand in hand, and there's like a discrepancy between the two. While with other people, Cersei, for example, I know that a lot of people detest her and what she does, and she's definitely not a good character. But I understand where she's coming from, living in King's Landing for so long, having to be married to Robert, who is extremely jealous. You know that he cannot keep his hands to himself. So everything that she does, while being a vile person, I understand better than what Ned does. For example, he finds it like unthinkable that Joffrey would have the throne because he's not the heir to the throne. But Robert wasn't either.
Correct.
And at the very least, we can see that Robert, during the war, did some things that are very questionable. And Ned didn't really he had a problem with that, but he still supported his friend. And then Robert doesn't even know that Joffrey is not his son. He dies, and you can just pick Joffrey, and nobody would die, and the country would not be at war. So somehow, I don't really understand why everybody thinks that Ned is doing the right thing. He's one of the main reasons that the war actually happened.
To to just go back to what you just said about Ned and Robert did terrible things. There's one chapter that I was flicking through the book just before we went live, and there was one chapter where I think it is in the Ned chapter where it says, "Oh, I didn't know," when he tells Robert, "I didn't know that we now want to kill children." When Robert is saying the whole thing about we should kill Daenerys, and especially when she's pregnant, etc. And I wrote next to it, I was like, "Well, what about Rhaegar's kids? You were fine having those kids killed, and that was because of the rebellion." So. And yeah, I think that sometimes it's like, oh, blind eye, because it was the rebellion. So
well,
Exactly.
I think that is true, and I think that the reason why I'm going to guess that the reason why it was made okay during the rebellion is because that was times of war, and so the idea is that we're in quote unquote peace times right now, and when you're in peace times, you ideally don't want to just make it okay to just kill a child. That was sort of what I gathered from Ned's code, anyway.
They do explore the. Oh, sorry. I mean,
no, go for it. No,
they do obviously talk at this small council about, is killing a child now worth it, because then it prevents people from dying in the future, which is a terrible question that hopefully we never have to answer, but that goes back into the mentality thing, right? So
Yeah.
those are some of the things that are definitely explored. With respect to the killing of Lady, I obviously have a hard time with that part, obviously, but I understand why Cersei ordered it. If I were a parent and someone went after my child, I would kill the thing myself. So I get it. I understand why that was part of it. Even though Lady wasn't the one, I would want something executed because I would be unhappy as well. But
you just said it. You would do it yourself, and
I
Robert
would.
didn't.
Yeah. I would. You gotta be willing to swing the sword, right? That's what Ned taught us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me, Daenerys is very young in the book. And I feel like compared to the show, and I understand and I respect the show adaptation choosing to age up the characters a bit.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I feel like the fact that Daenerys is so young in book one, it made that moral question more powerful to me. Like, would you really choose this utilitarian argument to kill a child in order to possibly prevent a war? Just to have, how far would you go? And so it's something that I personally struggled with. I felt, I don't know, maybe I'm just not thinking strategically enough, but I really did feel Ned struggle with that. I personally did. But I also wonder too if maybe part of that changed for him, and maybe is the timeline right? Did he already have kids when the rebellion happened? Did the rebellion happen prior to him having kids?
I think Rob was a baby when the rebellion was taking place, so just Rob.
Yes.
And so, had he met Rob yet?
I don't think so. I think he was off at war, so
Yeah.
he knew by by Crow or whatever that he had one, but yeah. I don't think
So I just wonder about that, because I know a lot of people say that once they have kids, that feels, the idea of killing a child or any violence happening to children feels so much more intense and uncomfortable when you have a kid versus when you don't have a kid. So I wonder if maybe that changed him too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he ever agreed to what happened to Rhaegar's kids. I just think that in that one moment when he says, since when do we resort to killing children? It's not something like that he says that, where you think in that moment, where you think, yeah, exactly. I know he was openly against it back then already, and he already criticized him for what happened to Rhaegar's kids. But in that specific moment when he's like, since when do we kill children? I'm like, well, since a few.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And everybody's kind of chiming in about that. Like Ned was
never
okay with that.
I think I miss, how do you say that? Today my brain is really not working, and I didn't speak English at all for 2 days now, so I'm not used to it anymore. But I think I misspoke in there, where what I wanted to say was that in that specific moment, not in general, I know he wasn't okay with it, and that he didn't have anything to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so happy that I didn't have a chance to say anything, because I was going to say massive spoiler, but I am going to keep that until the last section. But there is one reason that I still find very important why I think that Ned is a hypocrite. We're going to wait with that.
Okay. We'll get to that then. We'll get to that. Because I didn't really sense that, honestly, on this read, but I could have missed something. And so maybe you'll illuminate my thoughts. For me personally, I felt like I actually connected to Ned a lot more on this read than I did the first time I read the book. but we'll go there. We'll go there later. But yeah, I think that that's an interesting moral question. Another thing I want to bring up though too. Oh yeah, I know everybody's like, no, Ned was not okay. Yes.
We know.
Thanks for bringing that up, everybody. Appreciate it. To clarify there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to bring up though was with Daenerys's chapter, because I really appreciated the cultural clash that Viserys. One of the things that I found interesting, as far as this isn't a huge moral challenge, I think, but it's the idea that like I gave you a bride, you give me a crown. The way that he saw that exchange as like I give you, you give me, this very transactional type of relationship with the Dothraki, and they don't see it that way. And I thought that was just interesting. So just any thoughts about that and about the whole Viserys scene? And we'll probably get into that a little bit more with full series spoilers, but just thoughts. Or do we want to save that for full series spoilers? I don't know.
Well, I would say just in general, bloodlines don't mean anything to the Dothraki. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't care. They'll say who their father is. That's important, and who showed them how to fight or whatever. But that's not how they choose their leaders. It's might makes right in that world. So Viserys is nothing to them. He's not a warrior. He's not someone who has earned the ability to command them to do anything. And they don't really understand trade all that much either, because they're used to taking things. So that was never going to be a good match. That was never going to make any sense, to get his crown that way, right?
Yeah. I just thought it was interesting because I wondered if there is sort of like a capitalistic lens that's thrown on that. Like I give you, you give me, equal exchange. I don't know. That was sort of what I was projecting onto that. But anyway, sorry, Alex, go ahead. I
was just going to say, there's definitely, I forget how old specifically Viserys is in the book, but he definitely is acts very conceited. He comes in with the lens of like, I'm better than this whole group of people. These people don't matter. They should listen to me because I'm their savior. I'm going to return the glory to my family name and so on. And I think that's very apparent from the first time you see him, and that clash is, it's very interesting. And I also think it stimulates Daenerys's arc, especially throughout this book, because you see her struggling with that too. Because as Joanna, you were saying, she doesn't remember anything about Westeros, so this constant fight between what my brother has been telling me all my life about what we should be, who we are, like how much better we are than these people, and like why they should be listening to us and giving us what we want because we gave them a bride, and what she's living now with this reality of her being the Khaleesi and married to Khal Drogo and everything. So I don't know. I just think it's a very interesting dynamic. I don't think Viserys has never been a character I've enjoyed, because I just think he's like just I don't know, but it's interesting. It's a very outward cultural clash that you see right from the start of the book, which is very, really, very interesting.
His death is one of my favorite things in the book.
So good.
It's set up that way. I think it's set up so you're supposed to be like, yes.
Very enjoyable.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Even the scene where they make him walk and stuff. I was just like, yes, shut up. That scene is so good.
Oh, that's so interesting too, because with Khal Drogo, I understand he's a product of his culture and everything, but it is interesting because am I right? He rapes Daenerys.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
But we kind of get over that in a way, because she gets
kind of
over
flips it. Yeah.
That's a very good point. And I think, but maybe I'm saying something very stupid here, but in Essos, Dany is the only POV that we have, right? As far as I remember.
That's not stupid. That's correct.
So you have a very unreliable narrator here who is afraid of Viserys. So, and somehow she starts liking Khal Drogo. But so we sympathize with him and we say like, yeah, but he's a product of his environment. So is it wrong what he's doing? In his culture, this is okay. for Viserys, even though he is a despicable human being, he didn't really have the best upbringing either. I think that he was maybe 10 years old when Dany was still a baby. They had to run away from Robert, the usurper who was going to kill them. He went to Essos. He was the beggar king for the longest time. And I think then, I don't know what his name is, but the rich man in Essos who takes them in.
Illyrio.
Yes. And he feeds him lies the entire time. And we do know that Viserys is at least mentally unstable. He hears that the people are like waiting for him, waiting for the true king. So somehow, since he was 10 years old, he had a very traumatic upbringing. And I think that if we justify Khal Drogo's actions, because that's a product of his upbringing and of his culture, we can somehow do the same thing for Viserys. And I think that the biggest reason why we dislike him more than Khal Drogo is probably because of Dany and because of how she feels towards those two men in her lives.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah.
So I understand, like, the first time that they have sex, that he does not rape her. But it seemed to me like there was a scene, and I might be misreading this or misunderstanding. So I apologize if I'm saying something stupid. But I seem to remember that he had sex with her without her necessarily wanting it.
Yeah, I think what Kyle just said too. Like she's, I think we're coming at it with like our own lens of.
Yeah, it is kind of a cultural, or not cultural, but it's like a. Yeah.
Yes.
By modern.
Yeah,
like, I think.
Yeah.
Also, the first time, yes, he waits until she says yes when she is in she's in a position that she cannot say no. But at the very least, I think in the frame that it's in and in the culture, at least he was somewhat respectful. Afterwards, there is a sentence that he writes her as Ren or something like that as his stallion, and that she's crying the entire time. So I think that we can say that afterwards he does rape her.
That's it. Thank you. That was sort of what I was interpreting. It is a challenging situation. And I know in some countries, they don't consider it rape if it's a man and wife, or husband and wife, which I still consider it rape personally, but we don't need to go there. But I just, I think it's interesting though, like just that, what you're saying though about how this is all filtered through Dany's perspective, and she is very young, so it is ambiguous,
very malleable. Yeah, she's only known this. She's had this one specific worldview and this already weird foreign world to her that feels, I don't know. The second she gets away from Viserys, she has like this whole new world opened up to her that eventually it's pretty predictable that she would eventually adapt in some way to just based on how he treated her.
Yeah, she has such an interesting arc in this particular book. I want to ask too about morality. There's so many things we could talk about, like, because I feel like that utilitarian question, I like the way that you framed the question earlier, like, if this person's wrong, I know Yolene, you were bringing up a lot. If this person's wrong, can we really say this person's wrong and that person's wrong? And in my head, I'm like, yes. I guess part of me does have a coded, yes, that person's wrong, kind of view. But it is worth questioning those things sometimes. And so I also want to just, because I feel like even with Jaime throwing Bran out the window, part of me is like, hell no, you're wrong, you're evil, you're bad. I hate you when that happened. And at the same time, that's an upfront and personal assault of a child, which somehow seems even more cruel and evil in a way. But at the same time, he's doing the thing of like, I'm preventing this bigger repercussion that could happen.
He's protecting his own family, especially his own children. Which is not the right way to do it, obviously, but they shouldn't be in the situation that they're in to start with. So,
but then part of me feels challenged of like, okay, so what could he have done instead?
Yeah. In that situation, I think protecting one's own family is extremely big in this series, and especially this first book. And I think going back to Ned, you kind of start to see, like, while he says he's protecting his family, and he is doing things that's definitely protecting his family, sometimes, he's defending it by saying he's protecting the realm, and it's all for the realm. but then I feel like you can analyze every choice he makes and be like,
Sure.
is that protecting your family at all, though? Whatever your decision you're making, that
Yeah,
that
he's
you think is for the realm.
Ned is constantly walking a tightrope of
Yeah.
like doing what's dutiful, what's honorable. And then at the same time, if you live by that rigidly, then there's no room for mercy at all. And then still having room for mercy and knowing when to allow that, when to allow some leniency. And that just creates so much cognitive dissonance in him. One question I have for you all with Ned's morality is, what do you all think about how his final decision? Because ultimately he did do what he was ordered to do at the end. He did confess for his crimes, even though he didn't really do that. And I guess maybe in his mind, I also wonder if in his mind, some part of him felt at peace with making that decision. One, because he was saving his daughters.
Right.
And two, because he felt he did feel inside that he did betray his friend. He did betray Robert at the end with the way that he wrote that will.
Yeah, I think if it would have just been his life on the block, he would have, stuck to the straight and narrow. But when you're talking about Sansa's life and potentially Arya's life and whoever else, it becomes a pretty easy decision. And that's the one time he's flexible and decides to go against what the right path, I guess, is, and is not honest. So I think he made the right choice for the bad choice that he had.
Yeah.
Yeah. I understand why Jamie pushed Bran in the moment, but if he had kept it, it's all his fault anyway. I guess that's the ultimate truth.
I mean, you could go further back than Winterfell for that answer.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
3 kids at this point.
It's hard not to just feel at the point. It's like, I know, and I thought that too. I even asked myself that too. I'm like, but he had incest. He was.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, but what if I just woke up one day and I'm in Jamie's position, like, and I already did the deed, and the boy, I don't know. That's probably too hard to put myself there, but yeah, it's confusing.
Maybe let's not go there, but I support consensual incest more than rape. So I'm like, well, with everything that's happening in this world, it's fine.
You guys have fun.
Yeah.
If you also look at it from their perspective, Cersei and Jamie, they grew up with the Targaryens still in rule, and for them it was totally fine to be incestuous. So why are Targaryens better than us? They don't have any dragons anymore. That used to be their excuse, like, we are dragon lords, we are better than you. Like, this has died out, so we can also do this. So.
Also, I wanted to circle back really quickly to Ned again. So one question I have is, when he's doing that confession, why did he feel like he needed to go as far? And I know this is Varys's advice, but why did he need to go as far as to say he was conspiring to kill Joffrey? Because that felt extraneous to me. Like, did he really need to go that far to say that?
I mean, I felt like they coded the message they wanted him to say, right? That's always how I've read it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I felt like he was given a script.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to say. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I've always read it, was they said, say these words. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It just felt so extreme, It's like, why would you need to go that extreme in your confession? It just... Maybe he had to. I don't know. I just wondered if anybody could illuminate that for me, but maybe it was necessary.
I think maybe it's to paint him even more as the villain. Like, if he really needed to say that message to get his daughters to safety, if it would just be, well, I have betrayed my best friend because I didn't want to have Joffrey on the throne, that's it. What's the big benefit for him? People would maybe start questioning, like, is there some truth to it? But saying, well, I wanted to kill him and I wanted to take the throne for myself and all of that, that's more like, okay, but there's some benefit to you, so it's sensible that you lied somehow.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, because I understand what everybody's saying here. I understand that they gave him a script, that's what he had to say. I guess to make it believable, he had to go that far. But part of me was wondering, why not just stop one sentence short of that.
They're just like crossing all their T's with him.
Yeah. Yeah. And but it is pretty dramatic what Joffrey does from there. That is just one of the most dramatic scenes ever.
Mhm.
Just so dramatic.
Really characterizes Joffrey very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there anything anybody else wanted to circle back to or say? I know I kind of kept the conversation going forward, but I know there were a lot of thoughts, and I appreciate all of you in the chat so much for bringing up certain points, especially about Ned's perspective and his code and his ideas with the rebellion and everything, because I think that's important. Those are very important corrections there. Is there anything else, though, anybody wanted to share about any of those? Yeah.
Well, I don't know in that sense, but also with morality, if what Catelyn is doing, because I know that Cersei is seen as like the bad person, but she does still love her children, and I think that then Catelyn, for example, she loves her children, but how she treats Jon specifically is horrendous. And I know that everybody thinks that, but somehow if I look at those two, I think that both are morally gray and have some severe issues, that they put their own children ahead of everybody else. And if anybody is threatening that, they are extremely vicious.
Yeah.
I think part of that is Catelyn's bias against bastards, which we see again later at the Eyrie when she's has Maya Stone walking her around, and Maya's like, well, I'm going to marry this dude. And internally she's like, you ain't marrying that dude. You're not good enough for that guy. Like we see that bias throughout the entire thing. Someone without pure blood just is nothing to someone like Catelyn, which is sad, but it's the way that it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Catelyn, man, that whole entire exchange was just so, it's so painful to me. It was so painful to read the way she treated him, especially when he comes to say goodbye to his brother when he's leaving for the wall.
Oh, that scene.
It should have been you. Those are like the saddest words ever.
The saddest. The saddest.
How could you say that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also especially loved right after that when he comes across Robb, and Robb checks in with Jon, like, is everything okay? And he lies to Robb.
Right.
And he said, oh, yeah, everything's fine. And he doesn't confess what Robb's mother said. I don't know. I just thought there was such beautiful subtext actually in that whole exchange that I completely adored.
Yeah, I agree. It's good stuff.
Yeah. There was somebody, Sansa. Yes. Sansa. Oh, that was so difficult. Like, why are you trusting Cersei? But Sansa really is in her heart trying to do what's right. You know, I mean, it's just everybody's just trying to do what's right, but they don't have the whole picture. And that's the frustrating thing, is that you as the reader have the full picture. And I feel that way even with poor Ned. I feel like it's easy to say Ned should do what we think he should do because we're getting so much more of the picture than Ned is.
Sure.
And I don't know. I mean, maybe to some extent you could say that Ned should have seen certain clues that were clear, but I still feel like, I don't know. I still feel for him. I still felt for him in this particular story. I felt for all the characters. I just felt like a lot of them were only acting upon their limited perceptions. And at the same time, I feel like Martin does a great job, in my opinion, and people can vary on their thoughts on this, but I feel like that Martin does a great job of showing what characters are doing based on the limited information that they have, and at the same time not making them seem totally stupid. Because I don't even think that Sansa was stupid. I think she was young and naive, and she was limited through her own lens of how the world works. They all are, but I don't think any of these characters are stupid.
She's had a couple bumps in the road, but life is still a fairy tale for her at that point. So she's still under the assumption that royalty is good and I'm being treated fairly, and so she's pretty easy to manipulate still at that point.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that that's also because of her upbringing. Like, everybody tells her that she needs to be a lady and she's going to marry this prince, and it's not more than normal that that's what she's expecting. Like, the Septa who is teaching her, she's always telling her how nice her handiwork is. And look at Arya. Arya is not a lady. And they always scoff at Arya. So that she treats Arya like that is not more than normal. That she does not like John, because John is her bastard brother. Well, of
Right.
course, her mother hates him. So
Right.
I think that she is infuriating at times, but it is because of how she was brought up. So I do think that she is more or less blameless here because she is still a child.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. All right, from here, I think this is a good segue to go ahead and move into full series spoilers. So I'll go ahead and put full series spoilers so we could talk about foreshadowing.
This is the best part.
I know. And I think I have a lot of thoughts, but I will go ahead and start with Scott. Scott, do you want to, does anything?
Yeah, I can give a couple obvious ones. I'm not very good at the foreshadowing thing, but we get foreshadowing like right in the first brand chapter, right, where we have the stag takes out the dire wolf. So we already know, or I guess those of us on a reread already know that ties into the whole Ned dying due to against the Baratheon household, even though most of them are Lannisters. So we have that. There's one line I really like that Great John Umber says later on, where he's talking about catching Tywin Lannister with his pants down, which then comes back. Tyrion shoots him with his pants down. So I'm not good at the whole foreshadowing thing, but those were a couple obvious ones that I was able to glean anyway.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I was gonna definitely bring up the first Bronn chapter and just seeing them pointing out these wolves are never usually south of the wall, and they come south of the wall and they die, and then so like foreshadowing of Ned and everyone go to south. I found this. I like glanced this when I was reading it, and then I looked it up to more clarification. But there's a line early in the book when you're first in Winterfell and Theon's talking about Hodor, and is like, Theon Greyjoy had once commented that Hodor did not know much, but no one could doubt that he knew his name, which is like huge foreshadowing for Theon's arc, because he eventually gets tortured so much he forgets his name and he gets caught. But yeah, I just thought that was a really cool piece of information. And there's like a bunch of little one-liners throughout the book that either are tied to Catelyn and Stoneheart, and there's like little lines like that
I literally have one open.
Yeah, and it's cool. Martin's very, very skilled at foreshadowing. If you can find a lot.
Yeah.
Dreams too. Any of the dream sequences like throughout this book and then Clash of Kings as well are huge, and they're like, he loves playing with dreams.
Yeah. I feel like we could have a whole discussion about the dreams. There were so many. I didn't realize there were so many dreams in this book. There were so many. I also wondered too when and this isn't even really a full series spoiler necessarily, but the scene where, well, you know how Viserys kept saying, "You're gonna wake the dragon, wake the dragon, wake the dragon," and that keeps coming up in Dany's dreams, and I kept on thinking, it's a different kind of thing than you're expecting. You are gonna wake the dragon. Yep, you're gonna do it, and not the way that Viserys thinks it's gonna happen. But I also want to talk about Dany, because as you know, with the show, Dany is the big villain in the end of the season, right? At the end of the show.
Why do we talk about this? I'm gonna go now, okay?
Well, honestly, when I watched the show, and I still am not the biggest fan of that last season or how that was done. It was super rushed. We don't need to necessarily go there. And I've always been like Team Dany. She was my favorite character when I read the series the first time. And I did have a friend after watching the show who said, "Oh, there's total foreshadowing even in book 1 that Dany is not a good person." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I have to admit that on this reread, there were flags. There were flags for me. But I think that they're flags that are easy to miss because you as a reader hate Viserys so much. Like I said, we're all kind of rooting for Viserys to die and kind of cheering for him to die. But it was a little weird to me that Dany was so calm and even joyful when that happened, considering how attached he was to her brother beforehand. there was something odd about that to me. I'm like, I get it as us as readers feeling that. It was a little weird to me about Dany feeling that way.
There's also a line somewhere where someone's like, what about, shouldn't we just kill her now and save thousands of lives later on? And I was like, listen. Okay. But speaking of Dany, there's one thing that I don't know why my brain never made that connection before, but there's the whole stallion that mounts the world, right? Is that English? Yes. And so there's this whole thing with her. This is her kid Rhaegal, right? And then as you read it, you're actually seeing that she is this prophesied stallion, because the prophecy's like, the stallion is the Khal of Khals promised in ancient prophecy. He will unite the Dothraki into one single Khalasar and ride to the ends of the earth, or so it was promised. And it's like, that's literally her. She is the stallion that mounts the world. So you see it all in there. So it's pretty cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Derry brings up a good point in that, if you watch the show, I think Dany's a big character where there's a major difference between how the book is portraying her and how Emilia Clarke, the actress, portrays her.
Sure.
And you definitely see it more in like A Clash of Kings and Storm of Swords. But I think right there from the beginning, she's just not as she's rootable, but you could definitely see, I definitely have always seen signs from the beginning that, like she's just as ambitious for what she wants, and she will become just as ambitious as anyone else in Westeros. She's just not there yet.
Yeah.
She is also only one generation removed from Aerys the Mad King. So
yeah, exactly.
there's a good chance some of that
definitely runs in the family.
Well,
I'm anxious to hear more about Aerys' backstory, because I think we'll learn at some point that he didn't start off to be quite the dick and the completely abomination that he was. I think we'll learn that he was actually a decent king and a decent dude, and then it changed over time, but I could be wrong.
That would be interesting. Wow. Yeah. I'm really
He's talked about as like he's talked about as like courteous and flattering to people and stuff. So like we get hints that he had some good to him, but obviously we usually just see the bad side. So I'm willing to bet that there was something happened at some point. And I could be wrong, but I've always kind of felt that way.
Yeah. I'm really nervous to see what's going to happen with that, because I mean, we see, even though, like I said, there are hints of things, I think, with Dany's character in this first book, at the same time, like there is, if we want to use the word morally gray, I mean, she does free some slaves. She does want them to be treated as women. She does show a feminist perspective in this world and the potential for that to grow in this horribly patriarchal medieval setting. And so it's like really easy to want to root for her, and it's understandable to want to root for her because she does have some really good values. But man, there are some dark tones there.
Some of the Mary Mesdor stuff was really, really good.
Yeah.
Like I feel for her a little bit. I don't like that what she did and these kind of things, and I don't like that she led to Khal Drogo's death and whatnot, but I sort of get her point. She wasn't freed until she'd been raped multiple times. All of her village had been killed and ransacked and raped. What did Dany really save her from? So I kind of get Mary's point with some of that stuff. So I thought that was all very, very good.
Yeah.
What's the name of that character again? I'm sorry.
Mary Mesdor or something like that.
Mary Mesdor.
I loved that whole entire, like, I've decided that that's a trope. I was talking about this last night on a different live. I think that's like a trope that I love in fantasy that I've seen before in another book I read this last year. It's like the old wise crone or wizard or priest type of character who you think you can trust, and then it's almost like bargaining with the devil. I love that. I just like something Faustian about it or something. It's just so cool. Yeah. And if anybody wants to drop in the comments, did you all who are watching this, did you notice anything foreshadowing wise that you want to share? Please let us know. I would love to hear I would love to hear any thoughts on foreshadowing you noticed in the book.
I think one I have here, and I don't know, this is like a theory foreshadowing. do with that what you will. So I think the show didn't go there, but I am 100% convinced that the books will go there, and that is that the dead in the crypts of Winterfell will rise in the war.
Mhm.
And there's so much foreshadowing for that. And one I just picked out was it was 534 in my book, and it says I don't know, it's a John chapter, and it says, last night he had dreamt the Winterfell dream again. He was wandering the empty castle, searching for his father, descending into the crypts. Only this time the dream had gone further than before. In the dark he'd heard the scrape of stone on stone. When he turned, he saw that the vaults were opening one after the other, and as the dead kings came stumbling from their cold black graves, John had woken in the pitch dark, his heart hammering. So it's like there's so much foreshadowing for this through this whole book, and I'm like, this is happening. This is happening for sure. So
Yes,
yeah, I love it.
that did stick out to me as well. That is really scary.
Yeah.
In a way. Yeah. But it's interesting too, because I think like the Starks, it feels like that's the family that everybody naturally wants to root for in the series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I feel like Ned's death, I know, like, again, I know people, it's really easy. I feel like I always have to want to stick up for Ned, because I feel like it's very easy to be like, oh, well, you weren't very strategic, Ned. You know, mercy isn't the strategic thing to do. You're just going to cause more harm than good by trying to do that. But at the same time, I feel like he had an impact. He had an impact on his children who he lived, you know, even if you yourself don't get to see the impact of what good choices you make or what honorable choices you make, they still leave an impact on those you've touched in your life. And so even going back to the first opening chapter, the way that Bran observes death and the way his dad felt it was his duty to be the one to kill the wildling, which, by the way, that was really cool how that person he killed turned out to be, I forgot his name from the prologue.
Geralt, I think. Gerald, something like that.
Yeah, something like
Yeah,
that.
I
We
love
haven't even
that.
talked about the prologue.
Yeah, the prologue is so crazy.
Prologue is so good.
Yes.
Yeah, we should
Really
talk about the prologue.
we should.
I'll just quickly mention though, I think like that impacted Bran. Like what the whole discussion about what it means to be brave, that
Right.
impacted Bran. So I feel like these like seeds that we leave behind, they are affecting future generations. They are affecting the future, even if we see Ned's shortcomings, see his mercy as a huge shortcoming, as a huge fraud. I don't know. That's just my hopeful perspective in a very dark world. Anyway, we'll talk about the prologue. Go ahead. I'll let you all talk.
Well,
Go ahead. Alex.
I was just gonna say, just wanted to bring it up because I feel like it's a very deliberate intention of Martin to start the book and the series off with that prologue and focus on, this is a threat, and then here we're going to go away from it and show you all this other stuff that's happening while this other threat is constantly happening. And something they, not to bring up the show or anything, but it's something they totally kind of missed with it, but they didn't know what to do with. And I think I don't know. I just think that prologue is so good. I think there's a lot of foreshadowing in there that I have been able to pick up on. But I think it really sets the tone of the story, especially when it comes to the North and what's the future of the world and what's to come.
Yeah.
Not the prologue specifically, but we kind of learned throughout the difference between the different threats that the Night Watch is protecting. And the wildlings are not really the threat. They are first men just like the Starks are. They're just on the other side of the wall. The real threat is these zombie dudes. They're going to kill and wipe out an entire planet. So it's interesting to see everybody's sort of taking their eye off the ball from the real threat. And most people don't even agree that they exist anymore. Even the people in the North, Maester Luwin and everybody else are like, well, that's not a thing anymore. Maybe it once was, but it isn't anymore. So it's really interesting to see how that's going to, how that does evolve throughout the series.
Yeah. And by the way, Jimmy was in a wonderful discussion over on A Critical Dragon for a prologue close reading. If anybody is interested, definitely check that out. You know what I love about this prologue and about this looming threat that nobody's looking at because we're all preoccupied with the Game of Thrones, and realizing that that's just a huge distraction from what is really looming there. I think, like, I want to say, I mean, and I'm sure anytime you say this is like an influence on something else, there will be other things that it's like, well, actually, Tolkien, well, actually, this person. But I do feel like I've seen it in a lot of modern fantasy where they do that, where they have some big political thing happening, and then a bigger looming threat in the background comes. And I always think of this series. I always think, was that influenced by Song of Ice and Fire?
Probably.
Yeah, but it also brings up a question that I brought up to you all in the chat, and I also asked Jimmy about this too as well, and he has so much insight, and he's also on a wonderful podcast, by the way, Bend the Knee. So if anybody wants to check that out, but I was really fascinated by just in this world, we have very long winters, we have very long summers, and what that means and what the symbolism means, especially when the Starks are constantly saying winter is coming, winter is coming. It sounds like a form of foreshadowing to me.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder about the mystery, the lore, the magic of this world. Everybody feels like, that's not real. Is it Mr. Lewin or whatever in Winterfell, who is always saying, yeah, that's just times of the past. That's not real. And, but direwolves still exist. And I think that stuff never really went away. But it's like, I feel like, again, I kind of brought this up in my review, but I just feel like a huge theme in this whole entire story has to do with blind spots. The minor blind spots we have as humans, the parts of ourselves we don't want to look at. Like Tyrion, he owns the fact he's a dwarf. He can't escape that. You can't really pretend you're not a dwarf if you're a dwarf. So he has no shame in pointing out everyone else's weaknesses and being like, own it,
Right.
Be willing to see you're a crippled now, be willing to see you're a bastard on a wall. And people just having to face these uncomfortable truths about themselves. And some people, they have to face it in way more uncomfortable ways than others, like Sansa Stark, seeing that the world isn't going to be the fairy tale ending that she imagined it to be. And for Arya, obviously there's a lot we could talk about with Arya and the blind thing going on, but and that foreshadowing. But I feel like that whole entire way of not seeing what's right in front of you, either as a person, but also in the world at large. And how real is that in our real life, by the way? Just environmental threats, things happening outside of our personal sphere. So I don't know. I just love the way the series handles that.
Yeah. Something I wanted to talk about, if you don't mind, going back to the prologue and the White Walkers. There's this thing that I picked up on this time that I was reading, and it's when we have the whole dance with me then. And the White Walker, he sees the sword that Royce is swinging, and he halts. It says the other halted, and then they dance. And then later on, you have Old Man, I think, telling the story of the last hero, and it says that the others were going after the last hero because he was prophesied to them, and he was like that he would have this sword or something. It was something like that. I could bring it up. I have the page up here, but it's something like that. And I'm like, so maybe the White Walkers, the others, they know that the prince that was promised, that Azor Ahai is coming with his flaming sword, and they're looking for this Valyrian steel sword. And so when they look at, and they know he's supposed to be like a blood of the first men or something, and so they see Royce and they're like, you look like what we're supposed to fear. And then they see me like, never mind, you're not the one. And so, and so I think this is going to be so cool if this all comes to play, that the White Walkers are looking out for this specific person already. And it's just going to be so cool. I just love that stuff.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I didn't catch that. It's great.
This is what happens when you read it in 5 days. You're like, wait.
It's cool that Royce makes that last stand, even though there's going to be no songs sung. There's nobody ever going to record what he did. And he was a complete dick up until that point, and we hated him. But he's trying to do what he can for humanity. So that's good. Yeah. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. And what about Arya Stark, by the way, just going back to that?
Yeah.
Most of my favorite Arya stuff is later books. So I really do
spoilers, so you can tell. Yeah.
No, I know. But probably my favorite Arya chapter is when she's chasing the cat down into the dungeon. And I don't think it's my favorite because of her. It's my favorite because we see the dragon skulls and the stuff that are remnants of Targaryen dynasty. So I love Arya's chapters, but I don't really get to love her until later books. I'll just say that.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Interesting. I love Daria.
I don't dislike her. She's
Yeah.
she's one of my least favorite POVs for the first book anyway.
I see.
Yeah.
I think she grew on me, especially, and I'm blanking on his name. And it's on the tip of my tongue. The sword master, the sword dancer.
Yes.
Syrio Farrell.
Syrio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, that whole entire.
Oh,
I just
Dancing.
my heart just broke.
her whole identity foreshadowing starts when he calls her boy. Boy, she's like, I'm not a boy, and he's like, boy, girl, doesn't matter. Your sword.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Yeah. I think she gives us like probably one of the better looks into King's Landing, because Ned, you have Ned, who's everyone will associate with. But he's walking that tightrope. Sansa's Sansa, so she's like living in this, oh, I'm gonna marry this boy and all this stuff's going on. And then Arya's just kind of like checking out the city and is just extremely curious. So I think because of that curiosity, the reader's getting a lot of information, even if it's through the eyes of a really, really young person, that kind of develops King's Landing in a way, and the other people around her, like Cersei and everyone. But
Yeah. I love that Matt put winter is coming, the end is nigh. Yeah, that's what it feels like. It feels very ominous, the way that is foreshadowing something. And the Starks, I mean, they're very Stark. Like, just they have that tone about themselves. And Ned doesn't even seem to have a big sense of humor. I love that about him, by the way. But I like, especially how he contrasts Robert. I think that's just such a cool friendship in a way. But I also love how a Lannister always pays his debts.
Yeah.
I find it really interesting how, the situation with how much in debt they are at King's Landing.
Yes.
And how nobody wants to look at that. That's another area of blind spots. Speaking of blind spots.
Bobby
He just has to find money. It's somebody else's responsibility to spend it and to pay it back. He just has to find it. So
yeah. And it's like, yeah, Lannister will always pay his debts, but what happens when we run out of money in the bank, And what happens when summer ends, and what happens when all of these things work against your house, or when you're forced to go south when you're a winter person and that kind of thing. So I just find that fascinating. I was going to say something else about the debt thing, and I can't remember what it was.
Well, it goes back to what Robert said. He doesn't know how to fight or how to fight back against things that he can't hit. And you can't hit money trouble.
That's beautifully said. Yes, exactly. Exactly. But meanwhile, we could throw a tourney. Invite the Night of Flowers.
Well, why not?
Yeah, that was just the best. I love that. I love it. Let's have a tournament. It's the best book. I just love this book so much.
I love it too.
I love how much Ned hates that the tournament is named after him. That's
yeah.
He's so upset that it's named after him. Good.
Oh man, it's so funny.
I don't know if this is foreshadowing per se, but when the dagger was mentioned and Littlefinger says like, "Oh, I recognize this dagger. Yeah, it's Tyrion Lannister's." That was a moment that I thought like, "Oh, okay." I wouldn't even think about it the first time around because I trusted Littlefinger somehow and I thought that he was saying the truth. But upon a reread, that was a very important moment. Yeah. And I immediately disliked Littlefinger a little bit more when he was saying to Cat, to his sweetheart who he loved, and he would never betray Cat, but there he is betraying Cat right there. So I thought that was a more important moment upon a reread.
And then we learned later that he apparently lost it by betting against his own brother, which we know Tyrion would never do, which is fun.
Yeah,
exactly.
So, and there's also, just speaking of foreshadowing, so a couple more things are just coming up in my head really quickly. So one is Bronn and how you, it's just so clear. It's so obvious. He's like not somebody you could trust. And it's like Tyrion sees that and he still trusts him. He still thinks he has Bronn in his court. And their friendship between each other is so endearing that you want to believe it.
Well, he knows he can trust him as far as he can pay him. And Tyrion, for better or worse, believes that his pockets are deep enough that he can trust him forever, which we know is not going to be the case, obviously. So
Yeah.
maybe other things Bronn cares about as much or more than money as well. So, some of those things he can't outpace.
Yeah.
Yeah, those moments between Tyrion and Bronn are awesome. There's the one where Tyrion's telling him about, how he was lied to. His first wife was like a whore, and then his dad, that whole story. And damn, I just remember the first time I read that, and I was just like, holy shit, dude.
Like, if that's your dad,
brutal.
You're like,
yeah, and it shows.
Aww.
I mean, that's when you start feeling bad. Not when you start, but that's a good moment where, like, you feel as a reader, you feel bad for Tyrion.
Totally. Yeah.
Like 100%.
Certainly get a window into Tywin Lannister.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Man, yeah, that's crazy. Let's see if any other thoughts. Sorry, I'm behind in the chat here.
There's always the moments in the book where they mention animals, and you're like, is this foreshadowing for something? Because there's this throwaway line where Arya's like, ha ha ha, could you imagine a wolf with a dead fish in its mouth? And you're like, yes, we can. Why?
There are a ton of references to a wolf's head. Like, I've seen them multiple times, and I'm like currently reading Clash of Kings, and they're all over that book too. And it's just like look at with hindsight of what's to come, like with the Red Wedding and everything, it's like that is very foreshadowed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the foreshadowing also with what's his name for the Red Wedding scene is also all over the place in book 1. What's his name?
Walder Frey or
Frey.
or Frey.
Late Frey or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, it's tragic reading book 1 and thinking about book 3. It is just it's incredibly tragic. It's also interesting, and maybe this is something to bring up that I might go in depth more about in the next live show when we talk more about characters, but I also just found it really interesting about Catelyn and how her parenting skills and her concepts of leadership are very different with Robb compared to, I think, how Ned comes across. So with his leadership skills, I mean, they're so different. Like the whole idea about like, you need your people to fear you. You need you need those who follow you to fear you. Whereas like Ned is like, you need those who follow you to know you. There's just such a big contrast there.
One thing Ned definitely can't do is play the political game. So he definitely was a very poor choice as a hand, because that type of political scheming needed in that type of position is just well beyond him. But I do think Robb certainly learned a lot from Ned, and you could see it as the Bannermen are starting to flock to him, and he wins over Great John Umber, and he wins over some of the others. But yeah, Catelyn is more about you need them to fear you. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Her style.
Yeah.
It's in the North scene is though so cool. Sorry, go for it.
No good.
No, I just want to say that whole King in the North thing. I'm like, oh, chills.
Oh yes, I know. Yeah, it's fascinating, and it was pretty exciting the way that they were able to catch Jaime Lannister. And Tywin didn't see that coming. That was powerful. What a powerful moment.
Yeah, and then at the end we have Tywin sending Tyrion off to be the hand in his place. And that leads into my favorite bits of Clash of Kings, where we have Tyrion ruling the world. It's good stuff.
Oh,
it's my favorite.
So excited to read those.
I'm so excited to read on with Clash of Kings. Yeah. Well, I think that we covered quite a bit. I know there's much more we can cover, but there is going to be a second live show here on my channel. I will be having a different panel of guests for that. And of course, I hope you all are enjoying the read-along / reread along for those of you who are participating. Any final thoughts anybody wants to share?
Yes, the last line of the book. Can we talk about it?
Go ahead.
So cool. It's like that it just gives me chills. So I don't want to misremember it. So 1 second, if someone else has something,
please read it for us.
Where'd it go? Here we go. Oh, so beautiful. I put a huge heart next to it, and it says, "And for the first time in hundreds of years, the night came alive with the music of dragons." And there's nothing better than that.
Beautiful.
So. Yeah, I know.
That is the perfect ending to that first book.
It is, yeah. Danny's arc in the first book is awesome.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Such a great arc.
And there's dragons again. It's so sorry.
We didn't really talk about it, and my mind doesn't work linearly, so I didn't bring it up when I probably should have. But John's conversation with Aemon is one of my favorite things in the book, where Aemon's talking about the times he was tested, and we learned about his Targaryen blood and where he was in the line of succession. I love all of that stuff. That's one of my favorite things in the entire book. And John does the old, well, you don't know what I'm feeling. It's not your dad. And of course, we know Eamon's had it pretty rough. So, that's John sort of coming to grips with, it's not always grass is always greener for everybody else type deals. So I really like all that stuff a lot.
Oh, I love Eamon's character. I love that dialogue so much. I mean, speaking of great dialogue, as we talked about at the beginning, that was powerful. I highlighted that whole huge section of dialogue there. I absolutely loved it. I'm the worst because I will annotate like crazy. I read this via ebook and I just like highlight and write note after note. And then I'm the worst because then before live shows, I rarely ever go back over my stuff.
I'm constantly highlighting.
I don't know about anybody else, but I was very surprised the first time I read it that Aemon was a Targaryen. Like I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming.
I could have, perhaps. The name
just from the name, but like nope.
But it surprised me. So
yeah. I'm really curious as we go on in this series to hear more thoughts about Jon Snow because when I read this series the first time, I remember I always attached myself to Jon Snow. I thought he was interesting. I liked him. But I found out that like at least in the small circle of friends I had back when I was reading it the first time, he was so unpopular with my friends. I was the only person I knew back then who liked Jon Snow. Everybody's like, ugh, Jon, I hate Jon. And I'm like, what? Do I have an unpopular opinion? So I thought I had a very unpopular opinion liking Jon. But it looks like Alan here hates Jon.
I'm on the other side of Alan here as usual. So I really like Jon. But again, it could be because when we're in his shoes, we're seeing a part of the world I really care a lot about. And the Night's Watch, and we're seeing that it's not a song either. It's not quite as wonderful as it was made out to be by his uncle or whoever else told him how great it was and how honorable. So I love all that.
Speaking of that,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Oh, speaking of that, a scene we didn't talk about is when he wants to leave and then his brothers come after him. That scene makes me cry every time. And when they said, they're like, oh, I told you honor would bring you back. And it wasn't your honor, but honor brought you back. And I was like, okay, we're good, Dad.
So good.
I'm dying. It's so good. It's just so good. I feel like I'm Alan now with this. So good.
I love that Sam tries to stop him. I love that Sam goes and rouses, Pip and Grannon to make sure he gets stopped. Sam is awesome.
Talk about found family. Everybody loves found family in fantasy. That is one of the most powerful.
Yeah, that's why.
Yes.
Yeah, I love the Jon chapters for that reason.
Yep. I love the way family is explored in general in this series, by the way, because you do have that sense of like real family connection, like the Starks, even though it's complicated between Jon Snow and even his mother, obviously with Catelyn. I know it's not, well, whatever. With Catelyn and Jon Snow, however you want to frame that relationship, it's very tense and uncomfortable. And, it's obviously a little tense and uncomfortable with Sansa and Jon. And then but then you also see the real brotherhood, sisterhood with Arya and with Robb and Bran.
Yep.
And then you have the Lannisters and it's like their family, but they just it's more duty. It's more like a pride thing. Like, I don't want to let anything happen to my family member out of pride versus I really care about my family.
Which
you're lucky.
That's a Tywin thing, so that just gets passed down to the generations.
It totally does. You're absolutely
you're
right.
lucky to be to Lannister.
Right.
I think that's only Tywin, though. I don't think that's the other ones per se.
I think Cersei definitely.
I do really think
maybe
that
not
Cersei
Game of Thrones, but
well,
no,
yeah,
I think she is too.
It's mixed too. It's
100%.
mixed there too. Yeah, there's a mix.
I think, for example,
I just think she would
Catelyn,
absolutely defend her family.
When something happened, when Bran falls out of the window, she is with Bran the entire time. And at a certain point, Robb needs to go to her and say, I'm 40 years of age, I'm alone here, I'm the Lord of Winterfell, and you're not really helping. You're sitting here next to Bran the entire time, and you have other children as well. Rickon is 3 years of age, he doesn't understand what's happening here. Please divide your attention a little bit. And I think that a lot of people forgive Catelyn a lot easier than when Cersei is more doting on Joffrey. And she says the entire time, Joffrey was all I had at a certain point. So I don't have a choice. A mother doesn't have a choice. I'm going to love him. And even later on, she says, like, even if he is a horrible person, I cannot choose this. I am his mother. So I think that, well, I don't like Catelyn. So that's
I
part
feel
of it,
like
of course.
Cersei is so unpopular, though. It's not Cersei. Sorry, I think Catelyn is super unpopular. I don't feel like I've heard anything.
Yeah, well, in the chat, everybody seems to dislike Catelyn as well. So at least the chat also dislikes her.
Yeah,
I like that.
She's very unpopular.
She has great POVs. I don't like her as a character, but she has fantastic POVs.
Oh yeah, totally agree.
And
but Yulin, you wanted to say something earlier still.
Yes,
right.
What I also wanted to say was, which was a big spoiler, I wanted to say that Jon was not a Stark, and then I remembered that you don't know that in the first book. But part of what I was going to say was that Ned doesn't want Robert to know. And if you say that, well, he didn't agree with what Robert did, but it was times of war, he's still very afraid to tell Robert anything about Jon's parentage. Even
That's
how
true.
it's peace, even though Jon doesn't even know it. And he looks the Stark way, which is also... It's weird that the entire thing why Ned Stark found out is because Joffrey Baratheon is blonde of hair.
I know. Yeah.
I
The
love
DNA
a Song of Ice and
thing
Fire, but that's flimsy at best. That's like such a stupid reason to find out.
Yeah.
Anyway,
George likes to do some things with hair color. It's a weird fetish that he has. I don't really get it, but yeah, that happens also in Fire and Blood, obviously. So it's just something he does.
Yes.
I don't know.
Exactly.
What are the? I'm sorry.
I think
Alan just doesn't like Song of Ice and Fire. Which
Yeah.
is no problem.
He doesn't like me. He doesn't like elves. He doesn't like anything. So he doesn't like hobbits. Yeah.
I heard someone say the other day that Bran's chapters, they're never excited for them, but when they after they finish reading them, they're just like, that was awesome. And I feel like that's kind of how I feel. Not every single one. There's a lot of them that I just don't find that great, and I'd rather get back to other stuff. But there are definitely a number of them where I turned and it's a Bran chapter and I'm not super excited, but then during reading, I'm like, this is awesome. So
it's interesting because George has specifically said they're the hardest for him to write. The Bran the toughest.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, they tend to be more magical in nature, which is a little outside of George's comfort zone, he's admitted, and just writing as a kid is hard for him. So I think probably the reason we like them is because he obsesses over them so much and gets them right. That would be my guess. So,
but his chapters are exactly like that. You're maybe not interested when you go in, and then when you're out, you're so right. That's exactly how I felt the first time I read Game of Thrones. I was like, oh, Bran, really? And then after you read it, you're like, oh, this was such a cool chapter, especially with the crow and stuff.
I've always been Team Bran. I've always loved Bran.
Yeah, well, now I love
Bran too.
I actually, when I watched the show, I became less interested in his storyline for some reason, even though it should be interesting, but for some reason it just didn't really.
The show definitely changes some, like Rick's brought it up with Catelyn. I think the actors who played Catelyn made me like Catelyn way more in the show than 100%. I've ever liked it in the books.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to leave this comment up here, because I 100% agree that the show did affect that. I mean, she did an amazing job with that character. The cast in the show was phenomenal, I think.
For the most part, really spot on. Yeah, most of the selections were really, really good. One thing we can talk about in later books potentially, if we're talking about morality, is Bran writing Hodor and taking over his mind and using his body, and what the morality of that is. I don't know if that makes anyone else feel uncomfortable, but I sure feel uncomfortable every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about that. Really quickly, I guess I have a question for you all, because I remember, and maybe this is something, I don't know, maybe we should just talk about this later on in another episode, but I guess I just want to know more about theories about Jon Snow, like his background, because I feel like a lot's hinted at but I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know. I don't know what all the theories are. Maybe I just need to do a deep dive
Yeah.
and find out.
You have the whole Tower of Joy chapter in this book, which I somewhat I don't know how I forgot that, but I forgot that we got this chapter in here.
Which
and
one?
you always have Ned thinking about the promise me, Ned, promise me, Ned, promise me, Ned, and you're like, there's just so much happening there, and you know that there's something with Lyanna, and you just don't know if you don't know. Wow, but yeah, I feel like there's a lot of hinting.
It is weird that there's 3 of the Kingsguard that are protecting her, because there's other places they could be. So it is strange that that's where they're at. But we also are working off of what could be an imperfect memory, or what could be him dreaming an alternative to what actually happened. So we don't know for sure if that's exactly how it went down until it, is mentioned. But I think for the most part, I mean, I don't know how much we can rely on the show, but Rhaegar and Lyanna as his parents, I think I've sort of accepted that for 20 years. So
yeah, that makes sense.
I don't know.
Yeah.
There's still a possibility that it could be, is it a Shara Dane and Ned? But I think that is pretty unlikely.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. I feel like there's probably a ton of Reddit threads on this topic too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just look for R + L = J and you'll get like 70,000 results.
Yeah, that
before the show even was a
yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Anything else?
I don't think so.
All right.
It was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you
for having us.
all. Thank you all so much. And thank you everybody in the chat. I appreciate you all stopping by and sharing your thoughts. I think there's just so much passion for this series for good reason. And I cannot wait. I'm going to be starting Clash of Kings. I started the first couple of pages yesterday, but I'll be diving into that soon because that live show is going to creep up sooner than we realize.
There's so much to talk about with Clash of Kings.
Yes.
Fantastic book. I love it.
So if you all don't know, Joanna here here on the panel is going to be the one who is hosting both of those live shows. So the first live show, of course, will be the 5 of us again. And then the second live show is going to be on the House of the Dying.
So good.
Yeah, we're going to take apart that whole chapter. So
I'm so excited because I feel like it's been forever since I watched the TV show. I haven't watched that season since it came out. But I remember feeling like it did things very differently than the book did.
The book has way more in that chapter than the show showed.
I'm so excited.
I should sit down and do a comparison because I've been sort of rewatching the show again. But I remember it being a lot different as well.
Yeah,
I was going to do that as well.
Major hints that they didn't like in that chapter that they put in the book that George put in the book that they left out of the show because I think they were trying to make things as surprising as possible for season 3. But yeah, I love that chapter. So good.
I'm so excited.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. And for those of you who are interested, again, I'm going to have a different live show discussion at the same time, 2 p.m. EST next Saturday. And that one will be a spoiler discussion about character work. So if you want to watch that, we'd greatly appreciate it. And I guess that's it for now. So thank you all so much for watching and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.